Welcome to Module 2, Professional Content. I want to start adding definitions and defining terms and begin interacting with content so that you have an understanding of what our department's all about and what exercise science is all about. So if we look at the term health and human performance, we can define health as increasing quality of life. Can also look at increased longevity and then decreasing the likelihood of chronic disease. So if I'm a healthy person, I have an enhanced or an increased quality of life, I have a certain longevity, and then I'm going to resist chronic disease. When we combine health and look at it from a fitness standpoint, we're talking specifically about health-related fitness, and we'll define those terms in a little bit. If I'm looking at performance, so I have health and human performance. Human performance goes above and beyond health, and it's looking at other qualities. So for example, if I'm talking about enhancing athletic ability, or if I'm looking at my work environment and I move boxes all day, terms like agility, balance, and power, those are related to performance. We'll spend a little more time speaking about health-related fitness, so the health component, and really we'll be focusing on that connection between physical activity and resisting chronic disease. So when I talk about health-related fitness, I'm really talking about 5 components. Sometimes you'll hear 4. When you hear 4 components of fitness, it's because somebody's grouping muscular endurance and muscular strength. But the 5 components of fitness are cardiovascular fitness. You can also hear that term cardiorespiratory fitness, so cardiovascular or cardiorespiratory. Sometimes you hear terms like aerobic power, but we're going to say cardiovascular and cardiorespiratory fitness depending on what context we're using those terms. We have body composition, muscular fitness, which has 2 components, muscular strength and muscular endurance, and finally flexibility. For cardiovascular endurance, you're basically looking at your body's ability to utilize oxygen for energy. The currency in our body for movement is ATP. So when we produce ATP, we do it one of 2 ways, either aerobically in the presence of oxygen or anaerobically, which is in the absence of oxygen. I use that term loosely. It's going to get a little more detailed than that. But basically, my body's ability to utilize oxygen, to deliver oxygen, to produce ATP is defined as cardiovascular or cardiorespiratory endurance. In this picture, we see somebody having their VO2, which is the measure of cardiovascular endurance, V as in volume of oxygen that the body can utilize. So if you hear me say VO2, I'm simply giving you a term used to measure cardiovascular endurance. So this gentleman's on a bike. When I came here many moons ago, we actually had a bike similar to this in storage, and I wish we would have saved it to hang from Silcox as a museum piece, but we didn't. Basically, he's exercising, and then he's breathing into this bag that's going to be collected and then analyzed for oxygen content. We do things a little bit different these days. So this is an example of a women's soccer player from the College of Charleston. We're measuring her VO2 on a treadmill. So every 2 or 3 minutes we increase the speed of the treadmill, and then she's going to be breathing in, and we're measuring the amount of air and determining the amount of oxygen coming in, and then we're also collecting air when she exhales so that we know how much oxygen has been utilized. So cardiovascular endurance is the body's ability to extract oxygen out of the air, transport it, and utilize it. When you look at typical values, so for the test that I just showed you a picture of, over time, the intensity of that treadmill is going to increase. So the speed or the incline or both will increase, having a greater demand to produce energy. And to get that energy, we're going to use oxygen. So as you can see, from the beginning into the end of the test, she has an increased demand for oxygen, which is really kind of cool that we can measure that. So she ended up being between 50 and 60 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of her body mass per minute. So there are different ways to represent that number. Sometimes you'll hear liters per minute, but the most common term for VO2, which is a measure of cardiovascular endurance, is milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body mass per minute. And this is a relative term because it's her body's ability to use oxygen relative to her body mass. Also, too, this graph shows heart rate because we were looking at heart rate response. Heart rate goes up as intensity goes up because in order to get the oxygen, the body has to increase cardiac output. So that's why the heart rate goes up. Okay, so VO2. In her case, she was above 56 mils per kg per minute. If you look at a typical exercise physiology lab, which is our 300 level lab, we have males and females. So there are some gender differences in cardiovascular endurance. In general, females have lower amounts of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin binds oxygen in the bloodstream and delivers it. On average, females, if they're the same height and weight, will have smaller hearts. And so there are different gender-related qualities. However, with that said, we have females that have higher VO2s than males. For example, in this subject, we have a female with a VO2 of 56.3. This was a competitive athlete, and I would say elite athlete. She was the #1 singles tennis player at the college when she was here, and she was super fit. So, but in general, guys are going to be a little bit higher. So for an average lab, we have a low value of 34 mils per kg per minute and a high value of 56.3. Again, that's milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body mass per minute. What about our mere mortals? Here's a general guideline of some values. So if you're in the 18 to 25-year-old, if you're a male and you're above 60 mils per kg per minute, that's considered excellent. So we do have ways to quantify and categorize VO2s. So if you're a female and you have a 42 mils per kg per minute, that's considered average. If it's at 48, that's considered good. So those are typical values. In general, in our labs, we see values from 30, 34, 35. Sometimes we even see 60 and 65. Cardiovascular endurance. This is a simple schematic. We inhale oxygen-rich air. Then we extract that oxygen with our lungs. We deliver it to our working muscles to produce ATP. And this is done in the mitochondria, by the way. Then we deliver, well, once it's produced in ATP, then we produce CO2 as a byproduct, and then we deliver CO2 enriched in O2 depleted blood back to our heart, and we off-gas this CO2. You'll go into more detail about cardiovascular endurance in 210 if you decide to take Exercise Science 210, which is fitness assessment and exercise prescription. And you'll also go into much more detail in exercise physiology, which is exercise 340 and 340 lab.